Okay, welcome back. We're going to draw a student today who has graciously offered to pose for us. And this is a 3/4 view. So we're going to start with a slightly foreshortened cranium. And I'm going to do this about sight size. Not a bad idea for you too. The line of the face is not straight at this angle. This is curving around. So this is sort of a simplification of the form of her skull. And we're going to draw the neck. The line of the shoulders is pretty far down below the chin. The ear is level with the, actually it drops down a little below the bottom of the nose. So we're going to say the bottom of the nose is level with the bottom of the cranium. The ear is going to drop down a little lower than that. And we're going to block in the hair. So this is a good time to do a little bit of measuring. Here's the back of the head. I would say the back of the skull is about here. So we're going to block in the hair back here. And what we're looking for is where the hair, how much of the overall width of the head the hair occupies. So this is one unit, here to here, and there's another unit. And I would say that's about 2/5. The center of this line is right about here. So if we find the center here, that's how I get to this placement for the termination of the hair on that side. The hair sweeps around over the ear. The line of the eyes is about centered on the skull, right? That's where we look for it to be, and I would say this unit and this unit are the same. Hair is coming up a little above the skull. So let's put the line of the eyes in, making sure that this unit and this unit are the same. The line of the eyes is horizontal because her eye level is about the same as the eye level of the camera. And this distance of the width of the hair is about the same as the width of the forehead. So if we block in some eyebrows above the line of the eye, the hairline is about halfway between here and here. So that puts it about here. So we end up with something like this for the overall block in. And at this point, I'm going to just be looking back and forth and making sure that the overall, the big proportions feel about the same in my drawing as they do in the photograph. You probably can guess what I'm going to think to do next. Before I do any, and some of you are wanting to jump ahead and do the eyeballs and the nose, the mouth. Before we do any feature details, this is the contour we're gonna pay attention to. We're gonna pay attention to this contour here. That's our main shadow break. And it starts below eye level along this cheekbone, curves up under the chin, and then falls down and turns into a cast shadow onto the neck, like that. And it's much harder to see in the hair, but you can see it extends up more or less along this broken path along the hair, like that. And everything to the left of this line is in shadow. So I'm left-handed. I'm gonna do my first shading this way. Most of you are gonna go the other direction, but we're just gonna quickly block this in. And following that, we're going to block in our main darks for the features. So the cast shadow of the nose is it's about 2/3 of the way between this shadow edge and the edge of the face. So I'm just going to put in a very rough shape over here. These shapes of dark do not need to be all exactly in the right place. We're going to use that. We're going to move them around in order to test our ability to get a likeness. So I'm going to put some darks in for the irises. Eyebrows. There's a little bit of shadow inside this eye socket. And I'm quickly looking back and forth between my drawing and the reference, and just sort of refining these placement of these darks until it looks like my model. and I've said this before, but I'm going to reinforce the idea that this is requiring me to lean on my right brain recognition system. Because if I can't see the actual shapes of the features, all I can see is how far away they are from each other. That's forcing my right brain to do the recognizing. Your left brain does a feature by feature analysis. Your right brain analyzes the gestalt, or the overall relationships between the features. And by deliberately suppressing detail, we force our brains to attempt a right brain recognition of the face. And since that's the part most of us get wrong, it's really wise to keep details out of it until we recognize our sitter. So I'm just going to refine the curve of this cheek. A little fullness here. A little tightening right here. I already brought the forehead back a little. And I feel like I might recognize her from this. Okay, we're gonna drill down into the features now. I guess we'll start with this eye, the eye that is closer to us. Double check your measuring. If we go from where the back of the ear is to the side of the head, this eye should be about the middle. You see that? So here's the back of the ear, here's the side of the head. So make sure you're placing it in the right spot. And then we're going to draw the actual shape of the eye. Okay, so how shall we think of this? It's often a good idea to, when you're confronted with curves like these, to block things in. Think of it as a simpler sort of, is this a trapezoid? I don't even know. What is it? It's a irregular five-sided figure. Is there a name for that? What's that? I don't know. Yeah. Well, we'll just call it an irregular five-sided figure. So we're going to block this in with straight lines, and then we're going to turn our straight lines into curves in a second. Okay, so there's our block in. Now we're going to go a little darker, and the block in is going to help us get the steepness of the curve here, followed by this slower decline towards the left. And I'm not going to touch the lower lid. Remember, there are no prominent darks in the area of the lower lid. There's the lash line, and there's the boundary between the white of the eye and this illuminated lower lid. There's no dark, so don't do anything dark there. The eyelid curve follows the curve of the upper lash line. There's a little bit of the inner lid appearing at this inside corner. The little gland. And the iris occupies about half of the visible eye. The white of the eye is in full shadow here on the left. Pupil is very dark. It's usually the blackest part of the face. Is the pupil. And I'm going to just do a very lightly sketch a little hint of the lash line down here below this boundary to just give a slight suggestion that we're seeing the lower lid. And the iris comes up a little, pupil comes up a little higher inside the iris. I'm going to shade the iris down everywhere except the highlight. And I'm going to shade the white of the eye where it passes underneath the lid, just very lightly all the way across. There's that little darkening. Inside the eye socket. And then there's a little shadow under the eyebrow and the hair of the eyebrow. As we pull the lash line all the way out to the outside of the eye, it becomes more prominent because there's a little halftone right under it. And what we're trying to do is show that this is a surface that's lit up. And that's something that, it's a surface that most beginners completely overlook, and it makes the eyes look completely wrong if you don't include it. Okay, I always recommend that you measure. Look for this plane change here, the bottom of the eye socket, and indicate it very lightly for yourself. It's not very prominent on her, but we're going to still place it for ourselves. And then make sure that you're pulling the ala close enough to that form. So here's the upper curve of the ala, and here's the lower curve of the eye socket, And just get in the habit of relating these forms to each other and make sure that they are close enough in your drawings. Almost every beginner I've ever taught end up with way too much space here, which is a reliable clue that you made the nose way too long. So here's the curve of the ala. There's the shadow along the bottom side margin of the nose. And here's that nostril, which was not part of my original sort of rough-in, but now that I've identified a little more specifically where that shadow is, I can place this inside it. Sort of a teardrop shape on the left, and then it flattens out as it goes to the right. And now we can get a little more specific with this cast shadow shape, which defines the philtrum very clearly. And the tip of the nose, this shadow comes up and around with just a little hint of the ala on the far side. And a little darkening of the core shadow at the tip of the nose, which just gives a slight suggestion of reflected light under it. Note that as I come around this corner and define the bridge of the nose, I'm going to use my lightest possible line weight, because this is light against light. Do not draw this with a heavy line. You'll be tempted to, because it's obviously an important part of the portrait, but please don't make that a dark line. And now we're just going to tuck this corner of the eye right inside the bridge of the nose. And this is a great example of something we've talked about before, but the width of this eye from corner to corner, this width, is probably about 50% bigger than this width, because this eye is facing us and this eye is strongly foreshortened, turning away from us. So be sure to make this, your brains are going to want to make the eyes the same size, and I'm asking you to resist that, okay? So here's the inside of this lid. Outside curve of the lid. And to place the iris correctly, it's useful to look at the white, the shape created in the negative space of the white of the eye. Just copy that shape and the iris will draw itself. And we've got the eyebrow on this side. Okay. So we've done a, we've basically placed the philtrum because it was part of this cast shadow. And I want you to notice that the mouth is behind the philtrum, and so this curve is a little bit to the left of this curve. You see that? So you come down here, and we're going to locate the center of the mouth just a little bit to the left of the bottom of the philtrum. So that's the center portion of the mouth. The left side of the mouth goes down slightly. Just a little bit out past the curve of the ala. And that side is long. And then this side of the mouth is much shorter. And usually we don't pay a whole lot of attention to the redness of the lips. We're interested in the actual shadow, which is basically here close to the line between the lips. But her lips have a lot of color, so we're going to very lightly outline them and just show that color with a little halftone. Now this is another interesting passage. A lot of you are going to want to pull the corner of the bottom lip out as far as the corner of the upper lip. But you see how it does not come out that far. It comes out only to about here. And so we end up with something like this, with a pretty full cast shadow under the bottom lip. The bottom lip is almost entirely in light, the main exception being this little cast shadow right through here. now we can get a little more specific with the contour of the face. I'm going to commit to a more definite line. Of the cheek. This apex of this curve is about halfway up the nose. See if this is the apex of the curve. It's just above the top of the ala. You see that? So I want the curve to peak right about here, and then it curves back in towards the eye. And we can also commit to the chin now. There's a slight sort of overlapping. Well, first let's look for how far the chin projects. So here's the outer curve of the chin. Here's the outer curve of the upper lip. So you gotta set your chin behind, the bottom lip. Set your chin just a little behind the bottom lip, and then let that curve slightly overlap the curve of the cheek. A lot of students will make the chin end where they see the light ending up here, but a lot of the chin is in shadow. You got to pull the chin far enough down, and then we're going to do some shading on the chin as if we were shading a sphere. So we're going to be shading across this shadow edge and darkening the cast shadow of the neck, and just bringing out that slight reflected light along the bottom of the chin. So there's a very faint halftone that extends from the corner of the mouth down towards this shadow shape. There's an interesting detail here. You see how here's the shadow edge, and here's where the color ends. So a lot of people make the mistake of believing that the shadow and the color of the lips and the form of the lips have to line up, but they often don't. So here's sort of where the form of the lip ends, and here's where the color ends. There's two different transitions right next to each other. So on the jawline, we start out with this clear overlap, and then as we move up and to the left, we are turning into a soft transition. So we're going to do some more subtle darkening up here, heading up towards the ear. So as I often do, I've given her just a little too puffy of cheeks. So I'm going to bring that line back a little. And it's also feeling to me like I could get away with just a little more size on that, the eye on the left. I'm just going to increase the size of this iris. Just a little. I want this iris to read slightly bigger than the one on the other side, which is obviously a little further from us. So then I'm going to have to bring that lash line down a little too. That correction is like less than a pencil width, but I think it matters. And I feel like this eyebrow is just crowding this eye a tiny bit. Bring that up a little. The hair here is casting just a little bit of shadow onto the forehead. There's the slightest halftone along here, which sort of defines the bridge of the nose a little more clearly. And pretty major darkening here of the hair as it falls behind the shoulder. I'm going to zoom out a little. And remember, we broke the hair up into two zones. One zone is in shadow, which we defined along this edge. And there's another little piece of shadow right up here near the part. And the rest of the hair is in light. So when we're adding these details to the shadow side, we can press pretty hard. And when we add the details to the light side, we're going to use the lighter pressure. I'm going to keep the hair really simple today because we're almost out of time. shade across this shadow edge, a little core shadow near the cheekbone, and a little bit of curved contour shading to bring out the roundness of the head. And a few details on the collar, and then we're going to call it a day. I think this is not a terrible teaching exercise, but I usually like to do portraits from life. And if I can convince her, I'm going to have her model for a portrait from life next time, which I will throw up at the end of this video for contrast. Doing a portrait from a photograph is so limiting because you're just not interacting with the sitter, you're just looking at a static image. It's more challenging to draw a living, like moving human being, but much greater potential to really capture something interesting about them, which I do not feel like I did in this drawing. So if I'm able to do that, I will definitely show you the result, if not the process. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.